So we thought maybe we would begin with a song and then we'll chant and then have a short meditation. And the song, some of you may recognize, Bara and Shamani will certainly recognize, because it comes from Swamiji's wedding ceremony. And it's called Dearest Friend, and it's just a lovely expression of divine friendship that is what underlies true marriage.
Dearest friend, in the blend of your life's path with mine, I have found love is crowned with freedom's vine. Sorrows all disappear when friendship's gaze is clear. May our sight, shining night, toward God incline. Dearest friend, in the blend of your life's path with mine, I have found love is crowned with freedom's vine. Sorrows all disappear when friendship's gaze is clear. May our sight, shining night, toward God incline. May our sight, shining night, toward God incline. So I wrote down a few thoughts yesterday of things to share, but as I've been thinking about it in preparation for seeing you all this evening, it occurred to me that all relationships are preparation for our relationship with God. And the essence of all of it is love. So when we try to make peace with our spouse or our co-workers, if our children are driving us crazy or whatever it is, really people have the hardest time with people. And if it's not fighting with a neighbor or squabbling with the person next door, it's feeling too isolated and lonely. We as a species need each other. And it's a huge part of our health to have relationships with people that are meaningful, people we can laugh with, commiserate with, have sympathy towards, give to. All these things are essential. And many studies have shown and proven that people live longer and are happier if they have healthy relationships. It's as important, if not more important, than diet. So we have to figure this out. You know, it's important to figure out how to have good, healthy relationships. And I think if we keep going back to love as the foundation, there's a beautiful book, I assume you all have had it there in India. It's written by Devi Mukherjee, who was a disciple of Yogananda, but he didn't meet Master in the body, but he was a contemporary of Swami's, and they were very good friends. And Davy wrote a book called Shaped by Saints. And in that book, he describes how his life was changed by Ananda Ma and all these other wonderful saints. And he tells a story about a saint in the Himalayas that he visited who had a little hut next to his small house, and he invited Davy to spend the night in that hut. And as they were saying goodnight, the saint said to him, "Now remember, Davy, do not, under any circumstances, open the door. And you may well be tempted around midnight, but do not open your door and come outside." So naturally, Davy was extremely intrigued and made sure he stayed up until midnight. And right around midnight, he heard all these growls and roars and rumblings, and he looked out the window, and there were tigers coming into the little area between their two small houses. And pretty soon, the saint opened his door and came out and started petting the tigers. And one of the tigers had brought some carcass of something that he had hunted and caught and brought it to the saint as an offering. And the saint scolded the tiger, "You know I don't eat that stuff. Now don't bring that to me." And the tigers were just like pussycats. They were just rolling on the ground and letting the saint rub their tummies and under their chin and behind the ears and just playing with them like house cats. And Davy, of course, had this strong desire to go out there, but he didn't. He remembered the saint's warning, so he stayed inside. But in the next morning when they got together, Davy was just saying how much he wanted to go out there. "I want to pet the cats, just like you did." And the saint said, "No, you're not ready yet. You have to be 100% love. Then you can play with the tigers." And then he said, "You're only at 64% or something." I don't remember the exact percentage, but that's what we need in our lives. We need to be 100% love. And then we can tame the tigers of rasty coworkers and children who are misbehaving and all of that if we can love them now when we're not 100% love quite yet. It will help us get to 100%. Swami talks about how we need to develop intuition. Intuition is very important. And what keeps us from intuition, he says, is that thought of separateness, which is born of ego consciousness. And the more that we can start to back off from ego consciousness, start getting a reduction, even a small reduction, of desires and ambitions, ego-centered ambitions, the more we can reduce those, it starts to lessen ego consciousness. And when that happens, we begin to become calm. And when we become more calm, then we start to be able to perceive the vast stream of life that is surging all around us. And when we can start to tune into that, Swami says, we start to develop intuition. So the first step in that is getting rid of, or at least reducing, ego consciousness. that sense of separateness, taming our desires and our ambitions that are selfish, and then getting less and less restless. So many people, when we teach meditation, they go, well, it's fine for some people, but I'm too restless. My mind is so distracted. But that is what minds are. That's why they're called the monkey mind, because they're just all over the place. But little by little, through meditation, through all of our practices, through the rock tumbler of relationships. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but rocks are smoothed out. Their rough edges are smoothed by being thrown together into a tumbler. And little by little, those rough edges are shaved away and they become smooth. And that's what's happening to us. We're in a seething tumbler of personalities. I have one friend that every time I see her, she tells me something new and unexpected about herself. And I just love that about her, because I learn something new and interesting every time I talk with her. I mentioned that we had a snake that we saw in a place we were visiting, and she told me, yes, I've always wanted to catch a snake. And she told me this adventure that she had been on with Sudarshan up at the Ananda village, where they went over and caught a snake that was in a foyer of somebody's house. I just never would have expected that of anybody, especially her. But we need to be interested in our friends and enjoy the vast variety of unexpected personality traits, and remember that God is always manifesting through that person. The person we love, the person we run from, God is still there. We have to learn to see God. And one of the ways that I have found in dealing with difficult people and people that have strange vibrations that don't jive well with our own, is that I consciously relax and I consciously listen. And I make a choice to be patient and to really hear not just a person's words, but what they are saying behind their words, because not everyone can express themselves the way they really want to. So it's important to listen behind the words. And very often, in that way, we are able to say something meaningful. I remember a time in the early days of Ananda, Swami would, have a satsang and ask people if there were questions. And I asked a question one time, and I didn't word it very well. I just sort of blurted out something that didn't make any sense. And he very, very kindly answered my question. I didn't express it more than 2 or 3 words, and he got it. but he could read behind the words. And that's what we need to learn to do too. I have a friend who was very close with her father, and she lived in America and her parents lived in England. And so it was difficult, those early days of Ananda when she was living there, to make that very expensive trip back to Europe. And so she would only do it every year or 2 or 3 years. And she told me this story that for the first however many visits, the time, the 2 weeks or a month or whatever it was, the time together would go beautifully and they would just have a marvelous time, she and her father especially, because they were very close. They would really, really enjoy each other and have wonderful times. But then, as her departure date grew closer, the last 2 or 3 days, her father would pick a fight with her every trip. And they would get into these yelling matches and just have this horrific ending to an otherwise beautiful time. And it finally dawned on her what was happening. And she realized that her dad didn't want her to go. And he was upset. But he couldn't express how upset he was because it was too deep a feeling. And he would just break down or something, God forbid. So what he would do is argue and pick fights. So what she ended up figuring out to do was that she said every word he said was like throwing a ball at her. And normally in the past she would just throw it back even harder. But instead, when he threw a ball at her this time, she would take the ball and put it down. And he'd throw something again, she'd take it and put it down. And she diffused it to the point where every visit was harmonious. And there was no more fighting. So think in those terms. Think about just diffusing a situation. Swami said every devotee should be able to get along with every other devotee. So if there's something that's just a trigger in another person, I remember once, many years ago, this person's, her whole energy just was like a magnet that is south and south or north and north. It just pushed away. I just would push away from her. And what helped me with her was I worked with her, and so I got to see her in action. And I realized that there was a lot to admire about how she worked. And because I could admire that, then I was finally able to accept and see that there was something I could learn from her. I had a boss one time who was, the saying is the boss from hell. And she really was. She just did not like me. She found fault with everything I did. Every time I tried to be creative, she squashed me flat. And I think the final blow was I was about to go out to lunch with a friend who had come specifically at my designated lunchtime to so we could go out and have that hour together. And this boss would not let me do it. She just refused. You can't just assume that, whatever. So what I did in that situation, I mean, I could have blown up and started yelling and walked off in a huff or whatever. Anything's possible. But I was really working on not reacting. And in that situation, I let her just talk and talk and talk and yell and yell and yell, and I said nothing. And then I looked at my friend and said, well, I guess I'll see you later. So I just went into something that made everybody laugh. Humor. I didn't make fun of my boss. I didn't challenge her. But it made the point. And the main thing that we have to do in life, dealing with all kinds of people in all kinds of situations, is to, as Swami said, he made peace his bottom line. That's what they say in business. The bottom line is where you won't go past that. So if we make peace our foundation and we work on becoming 100% love, then we will be able to play with the tigers in human form that come into our lives and help uplift them, or at least to maintain our own peace of mind, our own equilibrium. I remember Swami once when I was very new to Ananda, many could see, I was young, I was very inexperienced, and one time he took me by the shoulders and he put his face right in my face, looked me right in the eye, and kind of shook my shoulders very gently, but very kindly. And he said, even-minded and cheerful. I never forgot it. And it helped. That's what we need to do. And that incident with my boss many, many years ago, she expected me to hold it against her, that she had just blown off my friend, who was also a good friend of hers, so maybe there was a little jealousy there or something, I don't know. But she expected me to be huffy or give her the silent treatment or anything like that. And I don't know that my motivation was that great. I mean, it was 35, 40 years ago now, but I probably thought I'm not going to give her the satisfaction. But it worked. I remained, even if inside I was somewhat resentful or whatever, I just would not give in to that anger. There's a beautiful scripture, I forget what it's called, it's the conversation between Draupadi and Yudhisthira, and they're having a husband and wife, and they have very differing views. Yudhisthira is not wanting to go to war. These are all our relatives. And Draupadi has just been incredibly insulted. And she's saying, you have to go to war. But the way they are saying it is so even-minded. They're expressing themselves. They're being very articulate. And they are weighing each other's arguments, but not in an argumentative way. Just they're points of view. It's beautiful. And one of the things that that scripture says, I forget who says it, but the saying is, an angry man is like a snake in the house. Everyone wants to kill it. So we need to learn self-control. We need to conquer our anger, our resentment. It's all ego. Reduce the ego. Get rid of the reactive process. Be at peace. Work on becoming 100% love. And then you can get along with everyone.